On October 3rd, he asked me what day it was.
What day is it?
It's October 3rd.
Happy Mean Girls Day! Woohoo! Cue titles.
Hi everyone!
Hi!
Welcome to episode 3 of our live show, Study Overseas live show. This is the show for studying overseas, all things related to studying overseas. So we're so excited that you're here to join us today.
Yeah.
So,
It's so exciting.
Yeah, obviously we don't have Rob in here today. Rob's actually on
We can
holidays.
tell.
But we do have Taylor Schultz, our very good friend from AIM Overseas. So Taylor, tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, hi. As said, I am Taylor Schultz. I work on the marketing team at AIM Overseas. Tash is my boss. But we have a great relationship. It's good. We're good. I have plenty of experience studying overseas and travelling overseas as well, so hopefully I'll be able to share some of my knowledge with you guys during this episode and next episode as well, and then Rob will be back after that. So personally, I've studied overseas twice. So I spent a year in Berlin on a year-long exchange, which was great, changed my life, did a ton of travelling around Europe before, during and after as well, so I know what it's like to travel on a budget. And then, I went back to Europe, back to Spain to live for 3 months in Madrid specifically and studied Spanish intensively there as well. So I've done it quite a few times and I'm off to Europe for Christmas as well. So I'm going to use some of the tips from the episodes that I've wrapped up so far.
Yes.
During those travels.
So obviously we have an expert in our midst of studying overseas. So Taylor has so much knowledge that she's going to share with us today, and that brings us to our topic. So our topic this week is going to be on budgeting.
The funnest topic.
Maybe it doesn't sound the funnest, but it really is. It is going to allow you to do a lot of fun things while you're overseas.
It's a facilitator of fun.
Yes.
Budgeting.
So we're going to be sharing our best tips to make sure that you are going to be able to budget whilst you're overseas, so you can do all the things that you want to do.
So seeing as Rob isn't here, I'm going to steal one of his jobs, which is introducing one of my favourite segments of the show. I've really enjoyed doing this the past few weeks and watching the different apps that come up. So without further ado, this is Travel App of the Week. Is that better than Rob?
And we have Kayla Paradiso joining us again this week to tell us all about the travel app that she's found for us this week. So Kayla, hello.
Hi.
What app? Good.
Great.
What app have you found for us this week?
So this week, on the topic of budgeting, I found an app called Hostel World. So it's basically a filtering app, and it allows you to search different hostels around the world.
Cool. I love Hostel World. I basically lived off this when I was traveling in Europe. It's the best thing to do on a budget.
Wow.
Yeah, but tell us more.
It's really great. So there are so many hostels to choose from. You can filter according to the type of hostel that you are seeking. So for example, if you're after like a party hostel, you can filter that. There's hostels right in the city centre, in the outskirts as well for a calmer sort of vibe for your trip. You can also filter if you're after a private room or a shared room as well, and the price does differ. You'll find that a private room is a little bit more expensive than a shared room, but it's after you what the type of experience that you're after.
Very cool. Based on someone who has never used Hostel World before and is a little bit cautious about hostels, what are the top things that you would recommend looking for in a hostel before you go ahead and press the book button?
Really good question. So it's a really good idea. A lot of hostels run their own events as well. So that's something to look into. Definitely worth looking into Wi-Fi if the hostel offers Wi-Fi. Breakfast as well. So that's something to I believe you can filter that as well. But that's something to look into. And even washing. So if you're there for quite a long time, you want to make sure there are laundry facilities and things like that that you can take advantage of.
That's a really good point. I just want to harp on that for a little bit. It's so important that if you're there for a few weeks, if you're traveling around and you're sort of in between hostels and you come to one hostel that doesn't have any laundry facilities and you have a bag full of dirty laundry and nothing to wear, it's so important that that's included. Speaking from personal experience, I've been personally stuck for half a day in an Austrian laundromat because of that specific incident, and it wasn't fun. That's half a day I could have been exploring Austria, and I was stuck in a laundromat waiting for my washing, literally watching it go around in a circle in the machine.
So does Apple let you filter and let you know if there's laundry facilities in the hostel?
Exactly, yeah, and it's something that you can forget to include kind of laundry facilities, but you'll definitely appreciate while you're over there, because it'll allow you time to do some more exploring and not have to worry about washing your clothes.
Yeah. Awesome. What a great app. Very on topic.
Yeah,
it's a handy one.
Yeah. Awesome. And that's available to download on Apple
And
App Store and the Google. Yeah, Android and Apple.
Yep, so it's available on both those platforms, and it's also a desktop website as well. So,
and it's free?
It is, yes.
Great. Thanks so much, Kayla. I've used the website before, but never the app, but I imagine that will come in handy.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Cool.
No worries. Thanks, guys.
We'll see you next
Bye.
week. Bye.
Bye.
Awesome. It's a really great app.
I know. I love Hostelworld. I said it before and I'll say it again. I live off Hostelworld. I just love it so much. I'm a one fan.
Awesome. We'll jump straight into the topic now. So, budgeting. Why? Yeah. So, we're going to talk about why
in real time we can answer these questions as well, so get in the comments.
Yes.
But yeah, now, as you said, let's get into budgeting. So it's not the most exciting topic on the surface, but it's actually really important, and there's a few reasons why it's very, very important. So first of all, budgeting in general is just a really good life skill to have. So as much as I don't want to be, I'm actually now an adult, and being a responsible adult, part of that is managing your money, and so a budget is a really surefire way that you'll be able to track your expenses and figure out what you can actually spend money on. So that's the number one reason. Another reason is because it will actually allow you to genuinely enjoy your time. So if you do a little bit of research beforehand into what you actually are after in terms of traveling and studying and what you actually want to do, then it can actually mean that you have a lot of opportunities to actually do the things you want to do, as well as being able to have all the money to survive, which is really great. Other than that, it will also get your parents off your back. So, especially if it's your first time, if you're traveling and studying overseas and you've never done it before, and you have a parent who's quite on edge about that, then showing that you've made all the decisions beforehand and showing them a breakdown of your costs that you've thought about beforehand, so that you can reassure them that you actually have enough money, is just a great way to not have them hounding you while you're overseas, so you can actually enjoy your time. And not only for your parents, but for you as well. So it's great to have that peace of mind to know that you've actually thought thought about your expenses beforehand, and that you know what to do in an emergency, or you know that you can afford that little side trip that's just happened on the spur of the moment. So there's a few different reasons why budgeting is really, really important.
Yeah, and I think it really takes the stress out. You can really worry about more important things rather than money and what you're going to do while you're over there. So, yeah, that's why it's important. So, definitely recommend looking into it at the very least. So we're going to be sharing a lot of tips later on in the episode and in the Facebook groups. So, yeah, stick around for that.
Yeah. So it might be quick. It might be a handy thing to do to quickly recap what we talked about last week.
Yes.
So Tash,
if you didn't join us last week, we talked all about how to fund your overseas study experience. So literally talking about how you can pay for your study overseas experience, where the money is going to come from. We gave you different tips and ideas. So that really leads into this topic this week about how to use the money when you're over there.
So if you haven't watched last week's episode, I would suggest going back to that one, actually watching how you can actually get money, and there's a lot of free money available as well. So
free money.
Yeah, free money. So definitely look at that episode before jumping into this one, or at least go back to it after you've watched this one, so that you can actually figure out how to get all the money, so that you can budget all the money. So let's get started. And speaking of getting started, that's the hardest part.
Yes.
So because of that, we've given you an example. So you can see that on the screen here. So our producer has produced this lovely looking little spreadsheet with a real life example. She's actually planning on going to Mexico for 6 months. And so she's put together a breakdown of costs. So I think it's really important to look at something like this, because sometimes it can be really hard to know actually where to start and what to include. So if you have a look at this, it's got a few of the bigger cost expenses at the top. So the things you absolutely have to consider if you're traveling overseas. So flats, accommodation, groceries, eating out as well, because the reality is you are going to want to eat out. There's only so many times you can have Imagine Noodles. And then public transport costs, as well as transport by additional means. So for example, renting a bike or Uber, things like that. Did you want to talk more about the next things?
Yeah, I mean, there's also things that you're going to have to think about as well, things that you might not have thought about. So your gym membership, your Netflix and Spotify memberships, consider whether you want to keep them or cancel them. But if you are going to keep them, make sure you put it into your budget so your money isn't being drained whilst you're over there. Also, your travel money expenses when you're actually like planning to travel on weekends, so make sure you budget that in as well. And also I think it's very important to have your emergency money as well. Just in case, it might just stick there for the whole 6 months. You might have to dig into it as well, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So Taylor's actually been stuck in a situation where she's had to go into her emergency fund.
Multiple. Yeah, and it's not just for emergencies per se, so it's not if you break your leg while you're overseas, although that's definitely what it can be used for. It's also if you accidentally overspend on your budget, because that's the reality of budgeting as well. It's for those little hidden costs if something breaks. So that happened to me. I actually managed to break 2 suitcases while studying overseas. Don't ask me how. That's a story for another time.
Yeah, story for another episode, maybe next week.
Yeah, and missed flights. I've definitely done that, where I thought a flight was leaving at 7:30 rather than 6:30. I rocked up to the airport. It was already out of the airport. And I think it's really important to have those emergency funds, again, for your peace of mind, your mental health, your stability, but also it helps you to not miss out on opportunities that can potentially be really, really meaningful down the track. So with that flight that I mentioned, that was to Madrid with my partner, and that was such a special holiday for me. As part of that, we caught a bus from Madrid down to Seville, and I've harped on about this at least in the office and in a few videos. Seville's actually my favourite place in the world, like hands down, no question. And I went there while they were having their annual April fair, where there were a lot of traditional flamenco dresses just floating down the streets, and there were guys just casually on horses with top hats just riding down the street. And for me it was just so magical, and it was such a good introduction to Spain, and I've been back to Spain since, and I'm going back to Spain, hoping to go back to Seville as well. And without those emergency funds to get that missed flight reimbursed and to fly again to Seville, I just wouldn't have had that opportunity, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to brag about it to you guys.
Yeah, so really important. Make sure you do
Super
factor that
important.
into your budget.
Super important.
Awesome. So we will actually share this budget into the Facebook group as well. So this is a very simple way for you to see overall your costs of what your exchange or your short-term study program is going to cost you. But next is a little surprise that we have for you as well. Here we go. So this is something that we have put together that will help you as well. So it's a little bit more structured and a little bit more detailed budget breakdown for you. So it is an Excel spreadsheet that you can use for your overseas exchange, kind of like your estimated amounts and your actual expenses, so you can start planning this now before you go overseas. So we'll be putting this into the Facebook group, so make sure you join the Study Overseas Live community group.
It's growing and growing.
Yeah, we have almost 100 students in there now,
wow.
Including Taylor and I,
Yeah.
and a couple of other AIM Overseas people from the office. So jump in and join. We'll be posting this in later tonight or later this afternoon for you to download, so you can have a bit of a play. It is a bit interactive as well, so if you put in the amounts, it'll pop up your total down the bottom, so you can play with, I think my accommodation is going to cost this much, I think my food might cost this much, and then you see a total, you'll be like, actually, I think I might cut back on my food expenses. I think.
Yeah, that's another reason why budgeting is so important, because at the end, when you calculate everything, you come up with a final figure, which is a really good goal to work towards. So if you're really hunkering down and working and you can't rely on your parents to maybe give you a little bit of money or scholarships from university or things like that, then it's really good to have a clear number, a clear goal to work towards, so that you can figure out how much you're going to spend per week, per month, per couple of months to actually hit that goal and make sure that your budget is actually going to be achievable.
Yes. And I might mention as well, if you've never done a budget before, then a good way is to look at the way that somebody else has done it. So that's why we put this together for you. Really simple template to use. If you've never created one before, then make sure you hop into the group to download this afternoon. But we'll jump into some of the points you should think about when you're creating a budget.
Just on that, so I think before you even think about these things, something that's really important to consider is actually the method through which that you're actually going to create the budget. So I am personally, and again, a number one fan of Excel. I just love it. I love that you can do all calculations. I'm really not mathematically minded, and so to have a digital platform through which I can actually have that calculated for me is heaven on earth. But there are plenty of apps that you can use. So I know Mint is a really good one. That's mentioned in a lot of travel blogs. That's particularly good if you are into having templates already set out for you, just like the Excel spreadsheet, but you'd like it in a sort of more of a visual way. So that's got pie charts, and like, who doesn't love a good pie chart?
Well, no, I do love a good pie chart.
Good, I was going to get a little bit controversial in here. Yeah, so you can use plenty of travel apps, so I'll say that again, that's Mint if you're into that. Otherwise, a simple pen and paper, that's really specific. It's quite good if you already have in mind your expenses, so that you don't need a template for it, and it's really accessible as well. You can just chuck it in a notebook. If you have a travel journal, sometimes they even have budget planners as part of it as well. So yeah, first of all, just think about your method, and the reason why I'm hounding you about that is because it's really important to actually find something that works for you, because if you are using an Excel spreadsheet and you just absolutely hate Excel, you just find it a horrible thing to use, maybe an app is better for you, and that's actually going to make it so that you can actually use the budget that you create and that you're actually sticking to your goals.
Yeah, there's no point just creating it before you go, getting over there and never opening up that spreadsheet again and running out of money.
Yeah.
So yeah, make sure it's going to be something that you actually use.
Budgets work, but you've got to find the right one for you.
Yes. Awesome. So some of the things that to start off with creating a budget, just as we said before, note down the biggest costs, so your flights, your accommodation, your groceries, so start with the biggest costs and go from there, right down to your gym memberships and your Spotify accounts, your travel money.
Definitely include those. It's probably best if you make them sort of into little categories, so that you don't just lump them all together, because if you don't consider those, they actually add up. All the smaller costs add up. Once you add gym membership, Netflix, Spotify, eating out, it just becomes this one grand monster of a sum of money. So just make sure that, as well as starting with the biggest costs, you actually include all of the ones that you're going to use.
Yeah, and I think the best way to do that is to do a lot of research and ask people, get into our group and ask our community what or you can go into the community and ask Taylor what she did. How did she? What are the costs? What are some of the costs that she had to think about when she was traveling in Berlin?
Yeah. On that as well, I'm not going to say if you don't have any friends, but if you don't have many friends who have travelled to the specific place that you're hoping to live or travel to, there's a really good website that I just want to plug for a little bit, if I'm allowed.
Yes.
So it's called expatterson.com. So it's kind of self-explanatory. It's how it sounds. It's a whole bunch of expats actually putting in the cost of living in different places. So for example, if I put in Berlin compared to Sydney, it actually tells me that Berlin is 23% cheaper to live in than Sydney. And that's something that's really key to note, particularly if it's on the reverse end of the spectrum. So if you're going somewhere like Switzerland, which is significantly more expensive, it's important to actually know that. Not only do they give you a general sort of estimate as to how expensive it is in comparison to Sydney, or the city that you're living in, they actually break it down as well into lots of very helpful little bits and pieces. So for example, you can see how much a dozen eggs are in a city, or a bottle of wine, or rent, or salary.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, clothes as well. If you're a shopper and you want to know how much clothes are, maybe go to a place where it's really cheap to buy clothes. So yeah, I just want to plug that, expatterson.com. That's really important to do your research so that you can actually have realistic sums when you start putting all of the features in your budget together, particularly with groceries and things like that, because that's a major expense and rent.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for that, Taylor.
That's all right.
Next point when creating a budget is it's a good idea to work out what you really want to spend per day. You don't have to look at this every day, so to speak. I know that this would be helpful for me. Taylor prefers more to look at her monthly or weekly or monthly type of spendings, but I know for me, I do like to work like day by day, and it's just something that I'll keep in the back of my mind. If I'm going to go to a Broadway musical one night, I'm not going to do something super expensive the next day, and I'll keep that in the back of my mind because I've already gone over my daily budget for over the 2 days.
That's really handy. One tip to do with that is to maybe think about the big cost essentials as separate to that. So I know that Tash just mentioned what I like to do is I actually like to go by month or week. It just depends on how things are going and what I'm doing. So if I'm living, I'll go by month. If I'm just traveling, I'll go by week. And what I do is I actually take out those big cost essentials. So rent, accommodation, big flats and things like that, and transport costs. I take those out of the daily budget so I know realistically how much I have to spend per day on eating out and spending money and souvenirs, and if I want to do, I don't know, a big shop or something like that. But yeah, as Tash said, it depends on you. So Tash likes something, I like another. Budgets are really personal, and
just find what works for you, really.
Yeah, exactly. But those are just a few little tips in terms of figuring out how to track how you're going from day to day, because it's all well and good to have a budget, but if you never look at it until you've overspent, then it's a bit of a waste of time.
It is pointless. Next is
Speaking
when creating a budget, you have to know that it's okay if you overspend on your budget. We know these things aren't going to go exactly to plan. Kind of is why sometimes you have an emergency fund, so you know that is there when you do overspend. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're having a great time, you're enjoying your experience. Don't stress if you go a little bit over your budget. Just think about what you can do to maybe cut down in other places in the next couple weeks or the next couple months maybe.
Yeah. The great thing about a budget is that it's really fluid as well, so that if you do over or underspend, if you're quite good with your money, which I'm not, if you do overspend, it's really important that you adjust your budget and you're continuously adjusting your budget, particularly if you're on a long-term stay, so like a 12-month kind of thing. If you notice that groceries are significantly more expensive in the first month, you need to adjust your budget as soon as you notice that, so that your budget is realistic and you don't end up in a deficit. So just make sure that you note down the expenses that are costing more than you expect or less, and then adjust accordingly. If it's the other way around and you are spending less, then you have more money for fun stuff. So that's good to know ahead of time so that you don't miss out.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to planning and being flexible, but don't stress.
Yes.
Awesome. Now we'll jump into, so funny enough, that wasn't our biggest tips. So now
it's just us, freestyling a little bit.
So we have put together our 9 best budgeting tips from experience, as well as from our producer Jackie. So
if you like these, share it with your friends. This is what it's here for. We're here to support you. we love doing this and we love traveling, obviously. We are an office full of average travellers. We've been to all corners of the globe, and we have a lot of tips and a lot of wealth of knowledge that we just want to share, just to get as many people overseas feeling comfortable and not restricted by money as possible. So if you like these tips, share it with your friend. Just show them our community, get them to join in, and they'll have all the resources there available for them as well.
Yes, and like Taylor said, we are here for you. We are sharing all of our best tips and all of our amazing advice with you because we want to. So we'd really love it if you could like the video if you're on YouTube, if you could share it, if you could subscribe, ring the bell. That really helps us out, and that'll help us keep sharing more tips with you week by week.
We've got a great episode.
Yes.
So I'm not just saying that because I'm filling in for Rob again. It's legitimately something that students are just begging for.
Yes, and something that Taylor is also an expert in.
So if you want to know more about that, hit that bell on YouTube so that you can subscribe and be made aware when we have our next website, or join the community. Our next live, sorry.
Yeah. Awesome. So we'll jump right in. Number 1. Well, our best tips is be realistic. I know I've said this a couple times, but just be realistic. If you know that you're going to spend a lot of money while you're overseas, if you're the type of person who does like to spend a lot of money, then then don't, in your budget, don't say, I'm going to spend $5 a day, because that's not realistic. You know that you're going to be spending more than that, so don't set yourself up to fail to begin with.
Yeah, speaking to what Tash said, I think it's really important not only to be realistic about the actual amounts of money and things that you're going to spend money on in your budget. I think it's also really important, like Tash said, to consider how you spend your money generally on a day-to-day basis. So I raised my hand just then because I know I tend to overspend. So I know how important budgeting is, and so to sort of compensate for that, I make sure that I am extra generous when I put my amounts into my budget, just to account for the fact that I do tend to overspend. So I will quite often double the amount that I predict to spend on eating out because I'm a foodie. And I just love doing it. I also love to travel, so I'll be quite generous with my extra travel expenses as well, because I know that sometimes spur of the moment things happen and I just want to jet off to Prague for a weekend. I mean, why not?
Yeah, and that'll only happen if you are realistic about your budget to begin with. Cool. Next one is to really consider the location that you're going to.
So I can speak to this from my student exchange. So I was studying German for years. Don't ask me how much I remember because it's nothing. But I was just adamant that I was going to go to Germany or Austria. Germany ended up being a little less expensive, so I went for Germany. And I picked Berlin specifically because Berlin's a really cool place to start off with. I know it's on a lot of people's bucket list. It's just a really intense place to live in as well. It's so cool, especially as a student. Would recommend. But also, it's so cheap. Like, buying groceries, I was just living the life, having so much good food just that I bought at the supermarket, and it was considerably less than what I paid for in Sydney. So that played well into this a tip. So I really chose my location based on my budget, and that's for studying overseas. The same goes for traveling as well. So I know in Australia we're particularly lucky to live really close to New Zealand, Southeast Asia, and Southeast Asia in particular is really good in terms of people on a budget, and just allowing you to kind of have a little bit of a free-for-all that you might not necessarily have here in Australia. So if you are on a lower budget, consider working your location around your budget rather than the other way around.
Yep. Great tip. And I might mention as well is when considering the location, do your research. Just do your research. If you know that you are going to be on a tighter budget, then look at places that are cheaper. Talk to people, talk to locals, or talk to people who have studied in the area before, just to get a gist of what you're working with. I think that app that Taylor was talking about before was awesome to see what the real costs are within the country. So if you know that you are a huge foodie,
Guilty.
but in a certain country the food is super, super expensive, take that into account in your budget, or consider changing the location.
Oh, woohoo! We have a question!
We seem to have a question.
Yay! Oh, I'm sorry, I got a bit too
I'm
excited.
going to pass this to Taylor to read.
Oh, okay.
To do the special honours.
Okay, so I have a question from Jackie. It says, have either of you ever come home with money left over on your travels, or did you spend it all on impromptu trips? I actually did come back with a significant amount of money.
Success! Because of the budget.
because of the budget and also because of the tips that we talked about in last episode, another plug for last episode. So because I was well aware of the different funding sources that I could use that were at my disposal to go and study overseas for a whole year, I had plenty of money left over. So I think you mentioned 6 or 7 tips, I think, last week, and I definitely used at least 6 of those.
Right.
So I got a scholarship from uni. I was on Centrelink as well. I had my Centrelink payments that kept coming through. OS Help is a really good one. I was lucky enough that a family friend gave me a bit of money to play with as well, and so I ended up with heaps of money. And as I mentioned before, Berlin is significantly cheaper than Sydney, and I didn't do my research and didn't know that, which was great for me because in the end I found out, wow, like I have all this money to play with.
Yeah.
Berlin isn't as expensive as Sydney.
But if you weren't so lucky to be in that situation...
If I was in Switzerland, I would have been eating Maggi noodles for 6 months, like no joke. And I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when I studied overseas, I went on a 3-week program. So a lot of the costs were up front, so I didn't have to worry about a lot of things while I was over there, just my personal expenses, and most of my meals were covered as well, so I didn't even have to worry about that.
Too good.
Yeah, so kind of if I wanted to go out and spend something, it wasn't like a necessity. So I knew when to cut back and when I could splurge a little bit more, so I did come home with more money than I actually expected. And it was because I also went to the US as well, so... a lot of the food is really cheap, and a lot of the drinks are very cheap, especially when you're staying on a uni campus.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought that I would spend more, but yeah, I came home with more money than I thought, which is great.
Yeah, that's a good thing to know.
Good question.
All-inclusive packages are really good if you're on a budget. They're not necessarily the most cheap things, but if you just want peace of mind, I keep saying that because I associate money with stress. So if you have an all-inclusive short program, like something that AIM Overseas or another provider does, or an all-inclusive tour like Kentucky, Top Deck, then that just gives you a stress-free time, and you know exactly that your money is spent on fun stuff after that because you've already got accommodation, transport, food paid for.
Yeah, a lot of stress is taken out of it, which is awesome.
Great question.
Yeah, great question. Cool, we'll go back to next tip.
The suspense.
I think we're done. Yep. Number 3, act like a local. This is probably one of my favourite budgeting tips. Really easy way to save money while you're over there, and also a really great way to experience a new culture or a new city or new country is just do things that the locals do. So you might not necessarily think of like going to a picnic and taking a bottle of wine with you that you buy at the store, or taking a lot of food instead of going and eating out at a fancy restaurant that was recommended on TripAdvisor.
Yeah. Tourist traps are a real thing.
Yeah.
Avoid those. To avoid those, I would recommend another website called livelikealocal.com. This is one that I personally use quite a lot. It's a really, really good website where locals from different cities actually put their favourite things to do rather than the tourist traps from TripAdvisor. Although, definitely do them if they're on your bucket list. I know I've done heaps of those. But in terms of a good restaurant to eat at, for example, the locals know where it's at. It's not necessarily the thing that's the brightest, the thing that stands out. It's often the little things that are in the little laneways that serve the best paella in the world.
Yeah, and I think that's the experiences that you remember the most and that are most special to you and that you can talk about for years to come, instead of talking about going to France and seeing the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, although that's great.
Although that's great. If it's on your bucket list, that's amazing. But imagine going to France and coming home and telling everyone about this amazing, restaurant that you ate at and tucked away, the side streets. And
I stayed with my partner's uncle when we were in France. We did a little trip together. And every morning we would sleep in till 12, and we'd wake up and he'd just gone to the local bakery and got all of these French baguettes and pastries, and he had ham on the bone that he would just cut off, and we had little sandwiches. So not only was it budget friendly because we were staying with him, he gave us little lunch packs to take with us, but it was also the good stuff.
Yes.
It was also the authentic French stuff, and I would 100% recommend. Another tip just on this, sorry I'm rambling, but
no,
I'm really passionate
awesome.
about authentically experiencing the local experience. If you're doing a study program and you're okay with it, you're comfortable with a homestay, and that's an option for you, 100% do it. Even if it's not the best experience, you'll definitely get something out of it, especially if it's in a location that doesn't have English as its native language. You'll just pick up the local language like that, and not only the stuff you learn in class, but the slang as well, which is often the thing that's the funnest to use.
Yeah.
And yeah, you'll get local meals that are cooked by nonnas or people that have spent years and years just perfecting their local cuisine, and so you'll get a really authentic experience. So sorry, that was
That's
a little
amazing.
tangent, but
No, that's awesome and really
it.
good tip. A lot cheaper than staying in
It's cheap
fancy
too,
hotels, and which is also nice. But if you're in a budget and you want to try and stick to your budget so you can have more money for fun things, then act like a local.
Exactly. Yes. Start a budget before you go overseas. Start a budget before you go overseas. I'm going to yell this at you until it cements in your brain. So this is good for a number of reasons. So first of all, it gets you in the habit of actually thinking in the budget mindset, because it's really easy to get overseas, be just overwhelmed by all of the things
Yes.
that you can do, all of the things. Especially if you're in a place where there's a lot of great food like Italy or Spain, you can just buy all of the things without even thinking about your budget twice. So get in the habit before you go over. The second reason, and the last reason I'll say why this is so important, is that it also gives you a chance to experiment. If you have a bit of time, so a few months out from your trip to actually experiment with your budget, you'll actually find out where you actually spend on certain things. So I was quite shocked when I started a budget to find out how much I spent on coffee per week. And it's risk-free. It's essentially risk-free because you're doing it in your comfortable, natural environment before you go overseas, and you're overwhelmed by all these things where it can get really real, really fast if you do go into negative numbers in terms of your budget. So use that time to experiment and to get in the habit.
Yeah, and also experiment with what kind of budget works for you before. So, as well as we were talking about before, we were talking about using a template or using pen and paper or using an app. See what works for you, so then you can then replicate that when you're overseas.
Exactly, and that's what happened for me as well. So when I went on exchange, it was actually a prerequisite of my uni before I went overseas as part of my application process to come up with a very brief budget, which was great because otherwise I wouldn't have thought about doing a budget at all. So thank you, University of Sydney. And that was just in sort of similar to the example of Mexico that we showed you before in the live. So it was in that, but it had very bare minimum. It wasn't personalised to me, and so it was through that experience of doing it and realising that there were actually a whole ton of things that I don't spend money or do spend money on that are or aren't included in that I discovered that Excel spreadsheets work for me because I can completely customise them as well. And you can do a mixture of things as well. You can grab a template and then put it into an Excel spreadsheet, or grab a template or use some of the things that we've talked about here and put them in a travel app or a budget app like Mint.
Yeah. Awesome. Next, allow the occasional splurge.
This is my favourite.
Yeah, you don't want to be too strict on yourself. You want to open yourself up to experiences, especially experiences that aren't planned. If you are studying on exchange and you've met a group of people and they want to go to a weekend away in Prague, and you're like, oh no, sorry, I haven't allowed this, my budget's not allowing it because I didn't plan ahead of time. Make sure you allow yourself to open up to those experiences, and that's why you're studying overseas, so you can do all these experiences.
Yeah, do all the things.
Yeah, at the same time, be smart about it.
Don't occasionally splurge every day. Buying breakfast every day isn't a splurge. That's
occasional splurge. But yeah, just don't be too strict on yourself.
Otherwise, you're going to end up hating budgeting. And it's not there to hate. It's not there to hate. It's there to help you.
Yeah. Do you have an example of where you've done a...
You actually stole my example. I don't know if you're reading my mind or what, but the exact thing happened to me where I met a great group of people while I was on exchange because I was lucky enough to stay in student accommodation, and although it's not for everyone, it was for me, and I met a whole ton of people. I've got so many friends from all over the world where I have free accommodation rights because I know them. So I actually met a ton of people, and there was a big group of people going to Prague, and they'd organised this before I'd even arrived in Berlin. And they had a free spot on the bus, and someone came up, knocked on my door and was like, hey, we're going to Prague in 4 days. We need you to tell us now if you want to come. And I obviously hadn't accounted for that because I didn't know these people the week before.
Yeah.
And I didn't know they were going to Prague. And I went, and it was great. We were there for Halloween. Prague and Halloween is something else. Otherwise, I would have just gone by myself, which has its merits as well. That's a teaser for next week's episode. But yeah, being there with a whole group of people is great, and traveling with a group of people is very budget friendly as well, depending on the people you're going with, because you can split meals, you can split Uber costs. So whereas you might not justify an Uber when you're traveling by yourself, if you're with 4 other people, you can fill an Uber and split the cost 5 ways. It might be cheaper than the public transport option as well. So yeah, that's my example.
Awesome. Number 6. So this is just a note. Know that pre-trip costs do add up. So there are going to be things in your budget that you don't think about, like the equipment that the clothes that you're going to wear while you're on exchange or on your short-term study program, especially if you're going over somewhere that's quite cold. You are going to think about what coats, lots of coats and lots of layers and beanies and scarves. Not necessarily that you have to buy before the trip. You might buy them on the trip, but make sure you take that into account as well, because they really do add up.
On that as well, talk to your friends about their own experiences and what they found were the hidden costs. So for example, I know from friends' experiences that they had to renew their passport while they're overseas, and that can add up as well, $200, $300, $400. Visas as well, so sometimes it depends on the country you're going to as to whether that will be expensive or not expensive. So for example, for me, it didn't cost me a thing to study overseas in Germany. I just had to get a residency permit. And so that didn't cost me anything. But for other places, I know it's very different. You have to jump through quite a few hoops. I think USA might be something like that. Although don't quote me on that. I don't have much experience. And just sort of ask them and pick their brains about what it is that they think is essential when traveling overseas. So for some people, you can take it with a grain of salt. Some people might say some really fancy, expensive camera, whereas that's just not reasonable for you. But for example, one thing that I really harp on about is a portable charger. And those things, they're not the most expensive things in the world, but it's something that's easy to overlook. And when it comes at $50 a pop, it's easy to say, nah, no thanks. But honestly, portable chargers, they're where it's at. They're where it's at. If you're in a foreign country, your phone dies, you don't have access to maps, Wi-Fi, you can't transfer money. Honestly, having a portable charger there that's fully charged, remember to charge it. It's just honestly, a lifesaver, like you said. Just take all these things into account, do your research.
Cool. Number 7 is to travel with people who have a similar budget to you. So Taylor mentioned this before. It might not always work that way, but when you can, try and align yourself with people who, as you said, have a similar budget. So if they are on a smaller budget, then do things together where you're not spending heaps of money going out on expensive dinners and lunches and breakfasts and activities.
4-star hotels.
4-star hotels, going to take into account accommodation. And I think Taylor had a really good tip about...
Luckily, I make friends with a lot of people who are also cheap, like me. But if you're in the situation where you really, really want to go with your sister or your best friend, and I know they're a little bit more, they're into a little bit more luxury than you are, sometimes it's just not an option to be like, hey, I don't want to travel with you because of the budget thing. As long as you make it really clear that you are on a stricter budget, just that they have that taken into account as well. Maybe you can do a little bit of compromising there. So it's really important to just be clear with the people that you're traveling with that maybe you don't have as much money for this thing, but you have more money to spend on traveling to Prague or whatever. Sorry, I'm going to endlessly use that example. So just be really clear and know when to say no to things as well. And I think that's particularly important because the people you travel with, more often than not, you're stuck with. And so if you spend your whole time overspending, you end up in negative numbers, and by the end of it, you're just eating soup from a can, you're going to have A, pretty bad memories, B, pretty big regret, and general bad vibes against the person that you travel with. You might feel a little bit that it's their fault. Which can be a bit of both. Just make sure that you do say no when it's not reasonable.
Just communicate and be open with the person that you're travelling with and try and compromise as best as you can.
No bad vibes here.
But when you can, do try and stick with people who do have a similar budget. That works quite well. Cool. Next one is don't skip out on the things that you love doing. And you can take that into account in your budget. So a good example is that if you are a really big foodie and you know that you just want to go over to Italy and really experience the local cuisine, you just want endless amounts of tapas and wine, and you know that those are things you really love doing, then take that into account in your budget. Don't think I really have to cut back on that while I'm over there, because that's going to be some of the best memories that you have. And on the same token, maybe skip out on some of the things that you don't quite enjoy. You don't have to go to all the museums in Europe if you don't want to, or maybe try and find cheaper options. Like there's a lot of free museums in the area, so don't feel like you have to do something just because it's on the travel list.
Yeah, this kind of feeds back into a few of our previous tips as well. So, for example, living like a local. So maybe rather than doing the hop-on, hop-off bus tour with the tour guide just telling you that this is the London Eye, this is the Underground, it might actually be better to do a walking tour to explore the city, for example. And those are often done by locals. They're often free. You just have to pay a small tip at the very end, and you get local insights, jokes. They're often really funny.
Yeah.
You get to meet a lot of other people who are also traveling and are also on a cheap budget as well, so then you can go on cheap travels together, which feeds into our last tip as well. So it can be that you might actually discover something new that you love that happens to be free as well. So that's really good. I know for me that was discovering street art in Berlin. Street art is everywhere in Berlin, and I discovered I really, really like it. And obviously it's free to see street art.
Yeah.
You just have to know where to look. And so I would spend half days here and there just going around the city taking photos of street art, just admiring the art that's in the street without paying a cent for entry into a national gallery. On that token, a lot of museums are free as well, so do your research beforehand to figure out which ones those are if you are into museums and things like that.
Number 9, our last tip is to collect experiences, not things. That's why you're going on exchange and having, why you're doing it, because you want to collect memories, not so that you can bring back like a little token of
like a
magnet, a fridge magnet.
Everyone has a million magnets on their fridge already.
Or like a little snow globe.
Yeah.
I mean, those things are fun, but they do add up very fast, and they're often like quite expensive in souvenir shops.
Yeah, exactly. On that, it can also add up really quickly in terms of weight as well. So you don't. The last thing you want is to have a suitcase half full of souvenirs, go over your weight limit at the airport, and then have to pay extra for baggage. So not only have you paid for the souvenirs, you paid an extra $50-$60 at the airport because your luggage weighs too much.
Yeah.
And posting home often just isn't an option. That's equally as expensive. So that's one thing to consider as well. And also, like at the time, it's really great to have a magnet of a palm tree where there's like very realistic coconuts because you went to the Palmers or something. But ultimately, those things aren't going to be as meaningful to you in 3-4 years as, say, like a Polaroid that you took with some new mates that you met overseas, or a little trinket that you picked up at a market because someone was like, hey, have this.
Yeah.
Sorry, personal experience. Definitely things to take into account.
Yeah, I think when I did my first trip to the US, I was like, I need to buy all of the things. And I bought so many souvenirs. I started collecting bracelets. I thought it was a good idea to every shop that I went into to just buy a different bracelet.
Like, I understand the sentiment.
Yeah, but then I kind of got, and I think I bought something like 7 pairs of sunglasses while I was on my first US trip, because at the time I was like, why not? And then I got home and I was like, what a waste of money. Like, what am I going to do with these 7 sunglasses and like 20 bracelets? Nothing. And
Where are they now?
They're all gone. They're nowhere to be seen. So, focus on your experience rather than collecting things.
In my opinion, it's more important to invest in a really great camera before you go than to buy souvenirs, because ultimately your photos are going to end up being your souvenirs. So.
Awesome. Well,
cool. Speaking
of memories, this kind of leads into a really nice memory that we have from a little fun office video not too long ago.
Yeah, it's our favourite staff member, Pixie, and then straight after that we'll head straight into our deep dive where we'll go in depth into a country that is to be named. Mystery. Let's keep a bit of mystery.
So hungry. Just gonna go in the meeting room to eat, guys.
Alright, cool.
Shit. I know she won't eat it.
No, there we go.
She's hocked down my lunch. Oh shit. Well, that was short-lived, wasn't it? Did I do something wrong?
And now it's time for Country Deep Dive. And today, this week again, we have Jackie Peters joining us. Hi, Jackie.
Hi guys, thanks for having me back.
Of course. And it's actually Jackie's birthday today as well. So big happy birthday to Jackie.
Thank you.
Yeah, so tell us about what country we're going to deep dive on today.
Okay, so today we're deep diving into the USA, which is a very, very popular place for Australian students to go. According to the latest stats, about more than 5,000 Australian students go on exchange to the US each year.
Wow.
So a lot of people heading over there. I've never actually been to the US myself, but I have many friends that have gone over there, and on my own travels, I met quite a few Americans as well, and heard you have gone over there yourself, Tash.
Yes, I have spent a bit of time over there myself. But yeah, what do you think that some of the basics are that we should know about the US, or someone who's thinking of traveling to the US to study overseas?
So to start with, if you're on a budget, as I always am, you'll be hitting up the supermarkets and getting cheap travel sims. So unlike here in Australia, again, it's not just a Woolworths and Coles duopoly kind of supermarket chains like that. Instead, there are so many options. There's Publix, Whole Food Markets, Wegmans, Kroger. There is actually Aldi over there too. They've expanded quite a bit European base. So if you're looking for something familiar, there you go.
Wow.
Travel sim wise, I would suggest going with T-Mobile or AT&T. But just so you know, the prepaid plans are a bit more expensive than they are here in Australia. Expect to pay about $40 to $50 US a month. So budget that in, guys.
Yeah, and I'd probably also just on that, even though it is a little bit expensive, definitely do that instead of using your own data while you're over there, because you can rack up thousands of dollars. Luckily, it has not happened to me. I'm not speaking from personal experience, but people that I've traveled with have done that thinking that it's fine, but it's not fine. So make sure you do jump on one of those US sims if you are going to be there for more than 3 weeks, I would say.
Yeah, because there's a 3-week tourist plan, but if you're going to be there for more than 3 weeks, relying on Wi-Fi can get you by, but it is so much easier to have your own sim. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So I've never been to America before, and to be honest, I don't know much about America. But I've heard of a few places in America that are really popular with people who are going over there. Do you have sort of a hit list of different places that you think would be great for people that are watching?
Of course I do. I've got a hit list everywhere, Taylor. It's obviously the basics, so like New York, the Grand Canyon, Disney World, those are my top. But I also heard that there's this really awesome, humongous lavender maze in Western Michigan. Like you can see it on Google Earth. So I'm adding that there too. That would be great to go to. How about you, Tash? You definitely to?
Yeah, I've been to a couple places. So I actually studied in Michigan for 3 weeks. So I spent a little bit of time there. I didn't make it to the lavender maze, but during that time we went over to Chicago. We spent a weekend there, and I've been to like San Diego, most places in California, and then spent a tiny bit of time in New York as well. But I would love to do like the Midwest. I think that would be awesome. That would be next to my list, I think. But it's very controversial that you said Disney World instead of Disneyland, because I would say I would love to go back to Disneyland. I've been twice, and I think I'd go back rather than go to Florida.
Interesting.
What? I didn't even know there was a difference.
Yeah, there's Disney World and Disneyland. Disneyland is the original in California in Anaheim, and then Disney World is in Florida, but it's much bigger.
Looks like we've got a Disney box over here.
I could go on forever. So tell us about some of the different cultural differences, because I guess unlike last week when we were talking about Italy and the week before about France, you wouldn't think there's that much of a difference. But yeah, what do you think?
Oh yeah, there are many differences. So even just meeting American people in different countries, you can still see the differences. The main ones I found, so to start off with, money differences. Obviously, tipping is a massive thing in America. Everybody knows this. But I just wanted to kind of explain why it is so important. So those in the retail and service industry are actually making a very, very low minimum wage, like in comparison to Australia, very low. So they count on tips to get them by. So you want to be tipping about 15 to 20% of the bill, and that they appreciate it very much. So definitely tip. There's
And they
also
do have excellent service as well.
yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah.
And
Anyway.
also, I might mention as well is that usually, I guess they would say 15% is what you should tip, but on all the receipts that they give you in restaurants and cafes, you'll have your items, and then down the bottom it will tell you, it'll have your total, and then it will tell you how much 15% is, so you can add it on. And how much 20% is, and how much 10% is. If you want to do the bare minimum of 10%, it tells you how much that is, so it's very very handy. That's great.
Excellent, yeah. The other thing I heard about was that they don't include the sales tax on their clothing prices. So you might think dress is $20, but you'll take it up to the counter and it will be a little bit extra. So that's something else to be aware of. Yeah.
That's like the GST in Australia isn't included as part of
yeah,
that.
exactly.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so it's included in the price, but it's not on the price tag in America.
Yeah.
So a little bit extra, just a little bit.
Very handy to know for someone on a budget.
Yeah. And obviously we don't have any language barriers, but is there anything else that we should be thinking about?
I found that even though that we all speak English, there are still really strange language, just little idiosyncrasies. Like they don't say heaps or I'm keen in America. I said that to my American friend when we were traveling, and she was so confused about what I actually was Australian slang until I actually left Australia. So there's that. Another cultural difference is they are quite patriotic. So they may make fun of their president and not agree with his policies, but in schools and other government institutions, they will be singing the national anthem with their hand over their heart kind of every morning. And they're actually, Americans are less likely to leave and move abroad for a few years like we Aussies do. They prefer to stay in the country.
Wow, very interesting. Just speaking on the point of little language differences, another thing that I picked up when I've been traveling, not to America, but to Europe, that I didn't realize was Australian slang is the phrase I reckon instead of I think. And that's another thing that if you say that to someone who's not from Australia, they'll just kind of give you a blank look, not realizing what you say, and you'll just have to kind of pick your words a bit more carefully. So I can definitely speak to that. Yeah,
and I found little words as well that we use. You might have to repeat a few times for them to be like, oh, I know what you're saying now. Like, for example, I was at a restaurant and I was trying to ask for water, and I was saying water, 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 water. And the lady was just like staring at me blankly like, I don't know what you want. And so I had to like slow it down and be like, water, because I think we just like run past the R's.
Yeah.
But they really like emphasize the R's in their words. So yeah, be prepared to say things a couple times over, because we do speak very fast as well.
I had to do that with my own name. So my name's Taylor, but obviously in an American accent it's something different. So they weren't quite getting what my name actually was, and I was getting made fun of for my own name. Yeah, great fun.
Awesome.
Yeah. All from me, guys. Pardon, sorry.
Thank you for joining us this week, Jackie. We'll see you again next week to deep dive on another awesome country.
Woohoo!
Guys.
Bye, Jackie.
Awesome.
That was cool.
Yeah.
I really liked that. The thing I love about these deep dive segments is that you get to know about a country in depth from someone who's actually been there. So whereas Jackie hasn't been there, she has a ton of great tips that were just reinforced by what Tash was saying about her experience while over there.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important when you're traveling and studying overseas, especially if you haven't done much traveling or studying overseas before, is just to talk with people about their tips and what they've done before. Even if they haven't been to the same continent as what you're considering, they're definitely going to have some tips about what to do.
Yes.
And so that kind of segues really nicely into our next little part of the show that we started off, we launched that last week, which is our Unsung Hero segment. And I personally love this segment because I work a lot with Australian universities in the work that I do with AIM Overseas, and there's a ton of people in the industry, in the student mobility industry, who are there specifically for this purpose, to give you guys tips and to give you guys help with applying for studying overseas, and just everything from your application to what it's like to study in that country, to just general support when you need it.
Yeah, even when you come back.
Yeah.
A lot of them, yeah.
If you're having issues with credit, they're there. They're always there. They can sympathise. They do this day in, day out, and so they know the ins and outs of the system and the particular things that are struggles for university students.
Yeah.
And
So unsung hero of the
Unsung
week
hero
is
Kayla Smith from Australian National University. So this is a wonderful lady who I actually work with quite closely at AIM Overseas. She is the Global Programs Coordinator. I've just been given the sign from our producer that Instagram is about to reach its time capacity. So see you later, Instagram.
Bye,
if this cuts
Instagram.
out.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. We really hope you enjoyed the time here. But yeah, Kayla, she's just a superstar of a woman. She's very bubbly, friendly, and approachable. So if you're from Australian National University, definitely duck your head into the student mobility office there at New Global Programs and say hi to her. She's just the most smiley person I've ever met, which is really great. It really puts you at ease when you are thinking about doing this big thing, because studying overseas is a big thing that you do need to think about. There's so many things to think about, and so Kayla's just really great. And what I really love about Kayla as well is that she genuinely really cares about students, and it shows. So she really just wants to get you overseas, especially if you're from a disadvantaged background. She's just done some work with a new scholarship at ANU. Check it out if you're in that boat. But yeah, she just genuinely loves sending students overseas, and I genuinely love that about her. So
Thank you, Kayla, for all the work that you do.
Thanks for being such a dream to work with.
Great. Well, that wraps up our episode of the week. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode of budgeting. We hope that you got some really, really helpful tips. There was a lot that we went through. I think we've been live for an hour now. But if you did enjoy some of the tips, please share them with anyone who is thinking about studying overseas. If you have a bunch of friends who are thinking about studying overseas, please share it with them. That'll really help us out, as well as liking the video if you're on YouTube, liking, subscribing, ringing the bell. That really helps us out.
Join the Facebook community.
Yeah.
Don't even tell your friends. Don't give them any context. Just invite them to the community, and they'll just be astonished by the resources that are there, including the budget spreadsheet that we talked about at the beginning of the episode.
Awesome. So yeah, this is the show for studying overseas. So we are doing this every Thursday, every week at 12:30. So
Tune in.
yeah, tune in.
We're not just talking about money all the time.
No,
although that's the
we
thing
promise
on everyone's
we're
lips.
moving on next week.
Next week, we'll be talking about traveling solo, and I know that's going to hit home for a lot of people. A lot of the things I was thinking about before I went overseas, because I was going by myself, was, oh no, like I've never been traveling overseas before, and now I've just strung myself into something. I don't have any experience at all, and now I've come out of it. I have plenty of tips, and I'm going to share them with you, and so is Tash. Tash has done a little bit of traveling as well. We're just going to have a heap of things ready for you, so tune in next week so you can get all the goss about traveling solo and hopefully calm your nerves a little bit.
Yeah, thank you for joining us,
Thank you
guys.
so
We'll
much.
see you next week.
See you.